Hi, this is Dark Journalist. Today I have a special episode for you as we approach the 56th anniversary of the JFK assassination. We'll be joined by Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter from Earth Files, Moulton Howe. Now we're going to be looking at compelling evidence that shows conclusively that President Kennedy was assassinated by elements inside the national security state, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the aerospace wing of the military-industrial complex for his efforts at revealing the secret UFO file and advanced technology. And we will use the anniversary of this tragedy to bring to light the clandestine war over the UFO file by intelligence networks like Expertech that continues to this day. We've all seen the reports with shadowy UFO programs and selected leaks to the media, but who's really behind that, and what game is being played? Let's go find out. Here we go. JFK killed over the UFO file with investigative reporter Moulton Howe. In 1961, when President Eisenhower said in his farewell address that Americans needed to guard against the military-industrial complex, it caused a stir that rippled for decades. Here was a decorated war hero and president warning against elements in the military seeking control deep in the national security state. When he met President-elect Kennedy, he no doubt passed along this warning in greater detail. There is strong documented evidence that JFK evinced a deep interest in the subject of UFOs, which may have come from his talks with Eisenhower. A loadmaster for Air Force One named Bill Holden later recounted a conversation where Kennedy remarked, quote, "I'd like to tell the public about the alien situation, but my hands are tied," unquote. This mindset made JFK deep enemies in the covert breakaway security state that coveted their position as the only group with access to knowledge of the alien presence and reverse-engineered technology. President Truman had originally created this group to study the phenomena, but they had exceeded their mandate and were assuming more authority and secrecy over the hidden information. Finally, in the fall of 1963, JFK made a deal through private channels with Russian leader Nikita Khrushchev to enter into a joint mission to the moon and for space exploration. This deal was later confirmed by Khrushchev's son, Sergei. JFK decided the surest way to peace was cooperation in space. To this end, he instructed the administrator of NASA, James Webb, to institute his policy of a joint space mission with Russia and substantial information sharing. This National Security Action Memorandum No. 271 was followed by a secret memo to the CIA released under the Freedom of Information Act. In it, JFK asked the CIA director for classified UFO information and details of high-threat cases. These memos are dated November 12, 1963, 10 days before President Kennedy was assassinated in Texas, where just a year before he had given his famous speech about the U.S. going to the moon.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Linda, it's great to have you back with us.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Now, there are so many dots to connect when we look at this assassination through the lens of the secrecy around the UFO file. So one of the things I want to start out with is this insider that you met in Washington who was talking with you about the early setup of that wall of UFO secrecy and getting us very, very deep to even before Kennedy got into the White House. So we can touch on that a little bit here to get us started.
A person in Washington that I met and who we talked about MJ-12. He said the public and the media don't understand that the classified documents related to UFOs and ETs were never really under the Air Force. Project Blue Book, that was just a con. That was just a deflection. It was to get the public and the media off of the government's and the Air Force's back. Meanwhile, UFOs, ETs were a constant and persistent presence on the planet, and those documents, those gun films that were made, all of it went through the Atomic Energy Commission and the U.S. Navy. Those were the two agencies that had most or all of the, we'll call it the physical environmental evidence, and it went into their archives, Atomic Energy Commission and Navy intelligence, and those are what are supposed to still be hidden in Suitland, Maryland, or one of those big underground archives that no one is ever going to get access to under any FOIA. So that is the Navy has had this major role while everybody deflected to the Air Force.
Right. It's actually the Navy.
Yeah. And I believe it was the U.S. Army, this is Bob Wood, that retrieved the Cape Girardeau, Missouri crash in 1941. And at the time, Bob and I and no one had a date. Today, just in the last 2 years, with the work that Paul Blake Smith has done and the book that he did and all the interviews he did in Cape Girardeau, where he lives, April 12th, 1941 appears to be a consensus date, and that is when FDR would have been president. So that extends the knowledge about, and this was both bodies and a craft. The craft was triangular or pie or wedge shaped, as exactly the three in the first week of July of 1947. They were not round, they were not spherical, they were not lens shaped, they were shaped like wedges of pie. That is exactly the description in 1941 from a photographer and other people that Paul Blake Smith has been able to talk to. And next to the wedge-shaped craft in Cape Girardeau, April 12, 1941, were two bodies. And the discussion, the people who were there said they were identical, they were considered to be clones, and they were taken someplace very secret. And when you think, if this is true, this is the context leading up to this paper that we are reading. If Truman and FDR reached out to medical people, what are these two bodies that appear to be identical? And if medicine in 1941 reported to FDR, Truman was a Democrat, was head of the finance committee for the Department of Defense. They all were in on the discussions. The assumption is the answer from medical people would have been they have to be clones if they're organic. I'm assuming that they were not metallic robots. Mm-hmm. So if they are organic and they are identical, I don't have the documents. I'd give anything to show you the documents. But this is now this has gone beyond circumstantial possibilities. Paul Blake Smith has found people who had relatives and families who knew and heard and told these stories about these two identical bodies.
Right. And we should mention here that we're referencing a book by Paul Blake Smith released a few years ago about this Cape Girardeau, Missouri case, the bombshell before Roswell. Now, as you said, it took place on April 12th, 1941, so that's 6 years earlier than the classic Roswell case. Now, is this the first case on record where alien bodies are seen?
It's a really good question. In terms of solid detail, meaning so many witnesses over the years, and trying to find anything that would go back before 1941 that would have the solidity that Cape Girardeau and Roswell, if you draw the line that way and say just in terms of details, substance, and credibility, we sort of have a beginning line with Cape Girardeau, which it gets mentioned. Missouri, that's the way it's referred to in the MJ-12 documents later on as Missouri, where they got what? A neutronic propulsion device. Where is it delivered? Robert Oppenheimer at the Manhattan Project, the school in Los Alamos.
Oh.
Well, so now if you say that's part of the weaving background coming into this, then the seriousness stressed to Alan Welsh Dulles that he basically has the fist and the power in the U.S. government when it comes to keeping the UFO alien secret.
And again, that's CIA Director Allen Dulles, who was the CIA Director from 1953 until 1961, when JFK fired him.
So, if we are dealing with a memo in which Alan Welsh Dulles is very upset about the questions that John F. Kennedy is asking the CIA, and he's no longer director, and he is coming from behind the scenes as the head of MJ-12, you begin to understand from that particular isolated point of view, the President of the United States is a threat to national security. So that as we go forward now, think about that.
It's amazing the level of power that's being assumed by this clandestine element in the government, like the CIA or the MJ group that's managing the UFO file. You know, guys like Vannevar Bush. So we're going to get into how JFK knew this was happening and tried to stop it. Before we get there, before JFK gets in, we have the 5412 committee overseeing this. Now, can you tell me about them?
At 5412, you can now Google and get on Wikipedia, which you couldn't for years. 5412. Since 1954, oversight of United States covert operations has been carried out by a series of subcommittees of the United States National Security Council. Oversight of covert operations was brought under the control of the National Security Council by the creation of the Planning Coordination Group in 1954. It was created by President Eisenhower's Presidential Directive 5412/1 on March 15th, 1954. That's the year that Alan Welsh Dulles is hiring James Jesus Angleton to take over that CI stamp and counterintelligence.
Wow, this is the time frame from when this covert government will be getting into position. And it's in this time frame that they will bring out Project Blue Book as a cover and really try to dumb down the public on the UFO file. Now, they'll use a very accomplished scientist to help them with this, and that is Dr. J Allen Hynek, who you knew. Can share here with us a little bit about Hynek?
He was very depressed. In the last dinner that he and I had in August of 1985, before I was going to Africa to produce a film on child survival efforts in Ethiopia, and J Allen Hynek had just come from Albuquerque and a trip. He'd been to one of the Air Force bases in California, and he wanted to meet with me and his good friend Richard Sigismund. And none of the three of us knew that J Allen Hynek would be dead by April. This is I remember that I left for Africa on, I believe it was August 5th on 1985. And so it must have been Sunday night, August 4th, that we had this dinner. And at one point, Hynek grabbed a hold of my right arm with his hand. And he leaned forward and he had tears in his eyes. Linda, do you think that I will ever be vindicated in my life? And we were talking about, he knew that there were supposed to be extraterrestrial bodies and craft stored at Norton Air Force Base in California. He had been promised that he would see them, and then that promise was rescinded. He was talking about what he considered to be the evidence of microwave attacks on Paul Benowitz and his lab and his wife, and that it upset Hynek. He knew, as far as I was concerned, in talking to us, UFOs, ETs are real, and how embarrassed he was that he was used and misused by various people from the Air Force to that Ford committee at the UN, where they were talking about UFOs as swamp gas. And I remember that night that he was sad, nostalgic, depressed, like talking to people that he knew were not judging him in any way, but sort of pouring out that he had gone from being a very good professional astronomer working at Ohio State and Northwestern, and was co-opted by the United States Air Force to be their intermediary as a scientist to the media and to the public on the issues of UFOs. And that he knew that when he was saying things like it was swamp gas in Michigan, he knew it was a lie.
Right.
And that he knew that there were bodies. He knew that there were craft at Norton Air Force Base in California. And he's telling us that night. And so when he grabbed a hold of my arm with his hand, with tears in his eyes, Linda, do you think I will be vindicated in my lifetime? The Shakespearean lens of it all, the tragedy of it all, is that he and his friend Richard and I, we didn't know that he had brain cancer. We didn't know in August of 1985 that he would be dead by, I believe it was April of 1986. I went to Africa and we never saw Alan again. But I'm telling you, that was J. Allen Hynek's angst, his interior agony, just a few months before he passed.
That the secrecy basically was going to win.
And I was provoked to say this because he knew how phony and concocted the Project Blue Book was that the public knew about. But then later I learned that there, from another man, a CIA whistleblower, very solid, the Project Blue Book, there was another Project Blue Book. And it was going out of a very kind of a really secret place on the East Coast. And that Project Blue Book, he said many times there could be projects with the same name, 4 or 5 deep. Like there could have been 3 or 4 Project Blue Books. It's the pro word, it's the code. If you don't have the code that gets you to we'll call it the real UFO ET Project Blue Book, all these other Project Blue Books become cover. And counterintel has used that for years. And so it was Hynek's insights, the fact that there was the multiple Project Blue Book, one that was real and one that was covered by, or one that was not.
Amazing background. Now, the 2 blue books is crucial, especially when we see the CIA creating the same types of front groups, again, to look like UFO Investigation or Disclosure Now. Now, I want to go over some of the memos that show just previous to his assassination that President Kennedy was making overt attempts to bring back the UFO file under presidential authority. One of those memos is titled National Security Action Memorandum 271, Cooperation with the USSR on Outer Space Matters. Now, I've seen this one at the JFK Library here. And let's also look at the memo he sent to the CIA, this one titled Classification Review of All UFO Intelligence Files Affecting National Security. In that document, he discusses that he wants all the CIA material on knowns versus unknowns, because in essence, he wants to share that with the Russians. So if, for instance, a UFO goes over their nuclear installations, they'll know it's not the United States, and it won't set off World War III. So it's part of this new cooperation on the UFO issue that Kennedy is proposing, and others have confirmed. But for the CIA and the paperclip Nazi elements of scientists embedded in NASA forming their own ideas about creating a secret space program, this is anathema to them. Now, in my interview with the Watergate lawyer Douglas Caddy, he's gone on the record saying that his close friend, the CIA Spymaster E. Howard Hunt, told him that Kennedy was assassinated because he was going to share the UFO file. Now, Hunt was in a position to know, and he didn't tell Caddy in any public forum for disinformation purposes. This was a close conversation, a conversation between two close friends before Hunt went off to prison. So let's go to this clip here of Caddy giving me this information back in 2015 now, and we'll come back around and look at its significance in 2019. Here we go. Watergate lawyer Douglas Caddy on Kennedy being assassinated over the UFO file.
And then we walked out, and on the street there, I thought, well, this is the last time I'll see Howard. I'm going to make one more stab, okay?
Yeah.
At seeing if I can get something here, you know? And I said, well, Howard, why was John Kennedy assassinated? What would be in those reports that would be important? And he said, why was John Kennedy assassinated? He said, John Kennedy was assassinated because he was about to give our most vital secret to the Soviets. About to give our most vital secret to the Soviets. And I was stunned by that. I mean, John Kennedy, our president, Soviets, and I never even heard about such a thing. And he said, and I said, well, what was that? And at that point, he leaned forward and looked right in my eyes, directly in my eyes, and he said, the alien presence. And he reached out and shook my hand, and then turned and walked away. And that was the last time I saw Howard Hunt.
Wow.
The alien presence, you know.
That's amazing.
Now, looking back, it didn't make any impression to me at the time because I had not...
Were you shocked by it?
Well, I was shocked, but I was not a student of the Kennedy assassination. That did not take place till 2006. It didn't mean that much to me. I knew it was important, but it did not mean that much. There's no way I could, in the alien presence, I was not really familiar with that either, you know. But I remembered it. I knew it was important.
Absolutely remarkable first-hand testimony from Watergate attorney Douglas Caddy that CIA agent E. Howard Hunt told him Kennedy was assassinated over the UFO file and the alien presence. Linda, we've talked about how fortunate we are that this conversation ever took place in the first place. And even in these few moments, that Caddy got an answer that gives us a much deeper understanding of history, JFK, and the UFO file.
And that when they get up, that Caddy feels almost desperate that he still hasn't asked the question that he really wants to ask, the only man that he knows that could possibly answer. And they get all the way out to the sidewalk. And Caddy says to E. Howard Hunt, but you've got to tell me, why was Kennedy assassinated? And finally, Hunt, looking at Caddy's eyes, Caddy stresses that his old friend is looking eye to eye and says, because he wanted to give away the United States' greatest secret. And Caddy said to me, I was so frightened, like, what? And he says, what is the greatest secret? And that E. Howard Hunt said simply, it's the alien presence, and shook Caddy's hand and walked away, and Caddy never saw him again. The alien presence is why John F. Kennedy was assassinated under the orders, I think, the evidence shows, of Alan Welsh Dulles, working with Jesus James Angleton, because Dulles defined the president's inquiry into MJ-12 and wanting to join the Soviet Union, to go to the moon as a threat to national security, and everything that MJ-12 had been set up from Truman to Eisenhower to keep the public and the press and our perceived enemies, such as the Soviet Union, from ever knowing that we had extraterrestrial biological entity bodies, and we had technology that defied any physics understanding at the time, and that the United States was set upon a secret space program, and that a big part of it was to get corporations to back engineer extraterrestrial technology and get it patented in the United States corporate system. And that meant that the tax-paying Americans wouldn't have any Freedom of Information Act request rights, because they can't, no one can, demand information from corporations. So that's where it all evolved. And today we have a parallel track nation. We have one nation that it has grown up from World War II to now, not a part of the American democratic institution, very little respect for or allegiance to the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, because their charter was as fast as possible to get on par with an alien presence.
Amazing. And there's that phrase, again, some echo from a conversation deep in the covert warfare mentality. Now, I want to go back to the CIA memo that President Kennedy sent to the director of CIA in relation to wanting all the information from the UFO file. Now, what is going on in that memo beyond what we see on the surface, which is certainly powerful and clearly illustrates the president's struggle with the deep state over this issue?
When you read the John F. Kennedy, and that he is asking this memo, he wants classification review of all UFO intelligence files affecting national security, and it would be very helpful if you would have the high threat cases. So he's been exposed to high threat cases.
Yeah. He knows that there are high threat cases, and he wants to share those with the Soviet Union.
And when you look back at the time of the intellect of John F. Kennedy, who was not read in on the Majestic 12 side, but he was an intelligent man who would have wanted to diffuse the Cold War. And diffusing the Cold War would have been finding a bridge to collaborate with the Soviet Union, given the fact that the Soviet Union at the time was the only given peer on the planet for duplicating some of what we were doing in the United States. There was not an advance in Japan, China, and other areas. It was really the Soviet Union and the United States that came out of World War II, bursting forward with a lot of technological know-how. And so if you are President John F. Kennedy, with the intellect that he had, and a sense of compassion, truly wanting a world of peace for everybody, which really fundamentally, I think, in the heart of decent human beings, that's what everybody would like. And he is looking at coming out of World War II and that Cold War and all that money and all that was going into the Cold War. It was just so logical that somebody like John F. Kennedy would say, let's use a space program and going to the moon to collaborate with the Soviet Union and diffuse the Cold War, and let's become allies in going out into space. Now, it's possible that John F. Kennedy was provoked to get to the moon because he was exposed to UFOs, and he wanted to know everything. And if I were elected president of the United States in the shoes of someone like John F. Kennedy, I would have assumed that I had the right to know every piece of paper, every plan, everything that was in any department of the United States government. And that's where the Byrne memo becomes so important, because it shows that MJ1 was saying the president cannot be allowed to ask questions. And that, as Bob Wood said, it's very clear that this was an operation outside of the Constitution. It was giving absolutely no respect to a constitutional democracy. This was set up as an island of major manipulation, and control over the United States' greatest secret, an alien intelligence presence. And what is also very, very interesting about where did that phrase, a presence related to ETs and UFOs, come? When you get in to some of the other documents that are associated with why did they call the Byrne memo, the top line, Project MJ or Majestic and Jehovah. Well, you find that the two people who are assigned to be the directors of Project Jehovah was physicist Albert Einstein and physicist Robert Oppenheimer. Einstein came up with E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. That was the insight and the key to get down into the fission of an atom and release the energy of an atomic bomb. Who was given the charge to do that? To take E equals mc squared and apply it to creating fission that could be controlled in an atomic bomb? Robert Oppenheimer, who did the first test at White Sands in July of 1945, and then we dropped the two bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, and that was technically and officially the end of World War II. Well, all the way back to June 1947, people associate June 24th, 1947 with Kenneth Arnold making the headlines around the world, saying that he saw 9 craft going like saucers across water. And it gets picked up, flying saucers. And that was June 24th, 1947. 1 week later, 3 wedge-shaped vehicles come down, one between Roswell and Corona, one near the Trinity site at White Sands, the other 30 miles east on the Mescalero Indian Reservation east of Alamogordo.
Wow, and there's more attention paid to the crash or crashes at Roswell than almost any other case. Now, is there something that you've heard that isn't really known about these cases?
I have had one person associated with knowledge to a certain degree of what happened in Roswell tell me that he had firsthand knowledge that in one of the craft that came down in the Roswell region, that when they got inside of it and they put pressure on the walls, that some kind of drawers would come out of the walls. They couldn't even see seams. It was like the molecules of the wall just dissembled, and these drawers would come out.
Oh.
And that inside of those were animal parts.
Huh.
Like from the animal mutilations. So how complex and how scary was everything once they were getting up close to what the UFO phenomena was on the ground? Was Truman running scared and creates the CIA to handle really what was going on with UFOs and creates MJ-12 at the same time in September of 1947?
Mm-hmm.
That is after the Kenneth Arnold June going back in time, and this is the date on this document that is part of what we've all talked about from the Byrne memo, because it's about Jehovah. There was research, and we find that in a document, it's very clear that it was classified at least top secret, and it's very hard to read it all, except that the date is November 4th, 1953 on this particular document. But there is another one that goes back to 1947 with the same discussion. So the timeline, we're now at an echo in 1953. before Truman knew anything about the 1947 Roswell, but obviously those guys knew about Cape Girardeau.
Right.
And they'd gone through World War II, and there were all of the lights, the fireballs, the Foo Fighters, all of that had been sort of mixed in with World War II. And so now this is dated June 1947, and the authors are Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer. And it is entitled Relationships with Inhabitants of Celestial Bodies. And throughout this document from Oppenheimer and Einstein, they spell Celestrial. And it appears to be 6 pages in which these two brilliant physicists were asked, you have to assume, by Truman and MJ12, if we have ETs, and we've got physical bodies, we got craft, what do we do? What is the moral and responsible way? Do we tell the earth? What do we do? And that's what these 6 pages are about. And then you come to what I think is the key to the entire saga of hidden alien intelligence on planet Earth, not only for the last 70 years, but probably 70 million years. And this is Oppenheimer and Einstein, and they say the most feasible solution, meaning how do you deal with ETs and advanced intelligence here on this planet with Homo sapiens sapien as the dominant surface life? Mm-hmm. The most feasible solution, it would seem, is to submit an agreement providing for the peaceful absorption of a celestial race or races in such a manner that our human culture would remain intact with guarantees that the alien presence not be revealed. And when you jump to Douglas Caddy going to dinner with E. Howard Hunt after the break-in in the Democratic National Committee headquarters at Watergate, and now you and I having talked with Caddy and realizing that one of the understandings is they wanted documents having to do with the John F. Kennedy assassination that the Cubans were supposed to have, and that those documents, those secret documents, were in the DNC, and that was one of the reasons that they were going in, because Nixon wanted them, LBJ wanted something, there were outside forces, and that when it's very clear, we know now in history what happened, but that when Caddy, the attorney who helped Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy and the jail and all of that, and ends up having to testify for both the defense and the prosecution, Caddy does.
Right.
And E. Howard Hunt then has to go to a minimum security federal prison.
And that's the whole scenario that sets up the historic conversation. Just amazing. And we see there the UFO file involved in these deep events, from Watergate, Iran-Contra, the creation of the continuity of government, the creation of the Space Force now, all the way back to the Jfk assassination and the battle there over the UFO file. Now, I guess the question is, what on earth gives this covert group, X-Protect, this deep state force, the idea that it can operate with impunity and stop at nothing to keep the secret of the UFO file or distort it publicly, even to the point of assassination?
Because they're in their own world, an island separated from the rest of the United States by what he would perceive as the order of the 2 previous presidents. And their job was forevermore, until something else changed in policy, to keep every piece of information about UFOs and ETs away from the public and away from the press. And anything that threatened that order was a higher threat to national security and justified elimination. And that is what I think is the true story behind the evolution from Truman to Eisenhower to Kennedy, the creation of the CIA on September 18th, 1947 by Truman because of the crashed craft and extraterrestrial bodies, hybridized, cloned, or otherwise. It started there, and today, the division, the schizophrenia of the United States of America, I think the very heart of all of the problems go to the fact that we're living in a nation that hasn't been a united country since the creation of MJ-12 and the CIA.
Linda, amazing, powerful work. Thank you. In part 2, we'll go deep and connect the dots on the covert development of UFO secrecy and this program and X-Protect. Subscribers will get that episode in their inbox next week, and you can become a subscriber at darkjournalist.com. Linda's work, of course, can be found at earthfiles.com, a very special site. Linda, it's great to see you, and I can't tell you just how important your work has been for me on all of this. So I really appreciate it.
Well, Daniel Liszt, thank God you are on this planet trying to keep cracking open these difficult subjects that the vast majority, including the New York Times and the Guardian, they don't want to touch with a 1,000-foot pole, because so far in the last 70 years, it has proved to be nitroglycerin to how many people, and a president killed trying to keep it quiet, and you and I and a few others, stubborn, persistent, and I think strangely loyal.
Thank you, Linda.